Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, man. How's your trip going?
Going good. I'm at the Kilconomics Festival in Ireland, where I'm speaking on a number of panels.
Oh, cool. What are the panels on?
One's on America's economy, one's on the economics of AI, one's on I forget what the others are on. A whole bunch of economic stuff, and it's a really interesting festival because it's you get economists and comedians on the stage at the same time.
That's really funny. What a funny premise.
And I think the comedians either make fun of the economists or laugh along with the economists, depending on how self-aware the economists are.
That's pretty funny. What is the latest in terms of what's like? We haven't talked about Europe in a minute. Are there any noteworthy developments on the that are worth discussing, or like what sort of, are they still sort of regulating to leading regulation and not as much on innovation? That's
not going to change overnight, right? Like that's not going to, yes, they're still regulating everything to death. They basically the big thing that's moving Europe and that may change the situation in Europe is defense, is Russia, basically. So America hasn't completely abandoned Europe, but then we've made big moves in that direction. And everybody's scared about Russia, but Europe is like more united than it's been in its entire history as a region. Everyone hates Russia. Like Sweden, dropped its neutrality to join NATO, and Finland joined NATO, and Switzerland hasn't done it yet, but it may. And so basically everyone hates Russia, and they fear Russia because Russia's and so this is pushing Europe to be more industrial minded. At the same time, there's this big China shock going on where there was sort of this pattern where America, dominated new industries like software, but then Europe would still maintain a strong position in old industries like auto manufacturing. Now here, and America wouldn't really compete with them on that much. GM and Ford were not very scary competitors when it came to auto manufacturing for the European auto companies. And but then now here comes China with electric cars. And now Europeans don't really know how to make electric cars well. They can make them. The principles aren't hard, but like they can't make them cheaply and effectively because all the European industry is tooled for internal combustion engines. That's what the European car industry is all about. And so now here comes China selling electric cars, and electric cars are better and cheaper and aligned with Europe's climate goals too. And so everybody's buying an electric car, and Europe's like, what? We can't make electric cars. Now, you could, but first of all, for the big old companies like Volkswagen, you've got this problem of disruption, right? Like everything's oriented toward internal combustion. So you can't just pivot like you can for like a little startup, right? If you're Volkswagen or any of these companies. And so the other thing is that so that's a big thing. And the other thing is that European regulations make it very hard for like a new big company to form and become like a new, Europe's BYD or something. It's just really hard to do that. Yeah.
By the way, speaking of things that we also haven't talked about in a while, I'm curious for any reflections on sort of the deal that was brokered around sort of Israel and Gaza, and if you think there's some actual stable equilibrium that's been reached, or is it just a momentary pause, or how should we think about the significance of what's happened there?
Well, so here we're kind of outside my area of expertise here. I think the good thing about the Gaza deal, besides the fact that it just stops people getting killed, the good thing about the Gaza deal is that it thinks about the economic future of Gaza. And it's the idea that, Gaza is going to have to be rebuilt. Much of it was bombed or bulldozed, more bulldozed actually, by Israel. And so Gaza is going to have to be rebuilt. And this idea that an economically self-sustaining, Gaza would not be the kind of place that opts for Hamas or some violent guys like that to be in charge. They'll have too much to lose, right? Rich places don't want to go to war, so you need jobs for everybody, and so that's at least people are starting to think about this, and I think that the Gulf Arab countries, like Saudi Arabia and UAE and these countries are they're getting some expertise in economic development. And so they may be able to sort of take over Gaza's economy. There's some sort of hope for Gaza beyond just maybe our Hamas fighters will finally annihilate Israel, which will never happen.
Yeah. Which by the way, I've been following a little bit this civil war on the right. Maybe it's too extreme to call it that, but first off, just it feels like this guy Nick Fuentes is mainstream, like this guy who was super fringe for a long time. You just got a New York Times profile. He's on Tucker Carlson. I feel like the right is going in some wild places, and it basically made me think, oh wow, there's there's sort of anti-Israel sentiment on both the left and the right, especially among this new generation. How does Israel even it feels like things do not look good in terms of at least American sentiment towards Israel as this generation grows up. I wonder if it'll be a durable trend. But
well, when Nick Fuentes talks about Israel, do you think it's really the state of Israel he's really trying to talk about?
So you're making the point that it's more just Jews in general, which is even worse than Israel. But I'll grant you that I agree with your point. But it seems like, well, I guess what's the point you're making? Do you disagree with my point, or am I making the wrong point?
No, I mean I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think that there is
Israel's in a tough PR situation, is what I'm saying. Israel's in a tough PR predicament.
I think that's right. And basically Israel's response, to things was just either haha, we're strong, we'll kick your ass, or you're being anti-Semitic.
Right.
And, a lot of the people criticizing Israel are anti-Semitic, and that's why they're doing it. Some are not. But in general, it's very hard to say, you can't just equate Israel with Jews. It's not the same. Right. It's its own country, right? It's like equating Saudi Arabia with Muslims. You just can't do it, right? It just doesn't make sense. And so, to some degree, people are going to get, people's ideas about foreign policy are not fixed in time. People are probably getting fed up with the amount of help America has provided to Israel. There's this lingering, I think a lot of this is lingering delayed reaction from 9/11 and the war on terror. This idea that Israel's policies toward the Palestinians created Islamic terror that blew back on America. And that if Israel simply stopped riling up the Muslims, then they wouldn't be blowing up our buildings. And I think that there was some of that, right? And it was suppressed at the time. I think it's coming out now. And this general idea that Islamic terror is being stirred up by Israel, I think some people are mad about, because you wouldn't have people marching and yelling Islamist stuff in Colombia or on the streets of America if you didn't have this Israel conflict. Everybody yelled genocide, Israel's committing genocide. Now, I don't think Israel was committing genocide, but it was certainly bombing the hell out of a lot of people and killing civilians. And, its response to the cries of genocide was just haha, we're strong, we kill, Israel's leaders sort of seem to have internalized the idea that the country will never have any true friends. And thus you've just got to stand on strength and brutality and fear. And that never really goes well in the end. You got to have friends, and you got to win the PR battle and the real physical battle.
Right.
Israel's been militarily incredibly successful. They basically destroyed Hezbollah in a week. They basically showed that they could slap Iran around whenever they felt like. And they and have basically mauled Hamas, if not, killed their leaders and just, really smashed them. And then, but yet at the same time, it's pissing people off around the world.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Hey everyone, make sure to check out the show notes for today's Econ 102 episode.
We've organized all the key insights from Noah's rants into an easy-to-scan cheat sheet format. Our show notes were actually created by Notion's AI meeting notes. It listened to our entire podcast episode, captured a full transcript, and generated a recap of the episode's meaningful takeaways. If you're someone who takes messy notes, forgets what was said in back-to-back meetings all day, or listen to one too many podcasts, you've got to try this feature. And because AI meeting notes lives right in Notion, everything you capture, whether that's meetings, podcasts, interviews, conversations, live exactly where you plan, build, and get things done. No switching, no slowdown. Here's an exclusive offer for our listeners. Head to the link in our show notes to try Notion's AI meeting notes free for 30 days. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. It's a bull market. It's a bear market. Rates will rise or fall. Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 43,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 AI cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one fluid platform with one unified business management suite. There's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions with real-time insights and forecasting. You're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. So if I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to your immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunities, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning for free at netsuite.com/102. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/102. netsuite.com/102.
And the question I have is, how much is Israel really dependent on America, either militarily or meaning if American support on this new generation is not strong towards Israel, what does that mean for Israel?
Well, I mean, America provides military aid to Israel, and it's questionable how much that's necessary. In its early days, that was absolutely crucial, American military aid. But now, Israel has a lot of its own manufacturing capabilities, and it has a lot of wealth and can buy things. But in the long run, if people won't sell you critical stuff, it's very hard as a tiny country to get a completely indigenous supply chain for your military. And so, Israel is dependent on other countries for its military, and it always will be to some degree. It can reduce that dependence, but it can't eliminate it. And it doesn't mean it needs America to write it checks, but it needs people to sell it stuff, right? And work with its military. And so, so I think that there is a threat to Israel. So how do you feel watching like groypers, get so prominent on the right? Like, do you feel like, oh, there's a flash in a pan, these guys are some dumb online fad, they're going to fade, look, Nick Fuentes is like weird and gay and nobody's going to like him? Or do you think like, this is the future of the right and it's scary? Or what do you think?
That relates to the next question or a conversation I was going to bring up, which is, it seems like the future, I'm getting scared. It feels like it's like Mamdani versus MAGA or something, or even groypers. So no, I think I think it is weird and potentially gay. People, speculating on Nick, but I don't think it's a flash in the pan. It feels like it's got some real base to it, and it feels like it's been kind of artificially, or it's been censored. But it feels like there's real demand for what they're offering among their base. And what are they offering? They're offering, sort of America first, i.e. anti-immigration, sort of, anti-war, isolationist, foreign policy. And then some, you call anti-Israel, you call anti-Semitism, but some real pushback on the Israel or maybe even the Jewish question. And so, yeah, no, I've cause for concern. Both on the right and the left, it feels like kind of it doesn't feel like we're leaning away from identitarianism. It feels like there's still some real interest in it. So that's my perspective.
Does it feel different? Does the identitarianism feel different now? than it did before?
It does, because I think before it was sort of exclusively on the left, and now, or mostly on the left, or at least the part I was
You mean like
seeing.
woke stuff was the main
Yes,
identitarian movement.
and now I feel like it's a lot on the right, and maybe it was always there, but it was censored or something, or I just didn't see it. But now maybe because of the algorithms or whatever, or because the right is in political power, or just because some creators are getting more popular, the ones we're mentioning. But no, I feel like there's a mirror identitarianism, from wokeness on the right, and I feel like it's pretty strong mimetically, as in, it plays well on the internet. People seem to resonate with it. So, the hope that we would sort of get past identitarianism on both sides, maybe was short-founded. We'll see. But I feel like, just watching these interviews, to the extent that the base dictates policy, and that's still an open question. I think there's cause for concern that there's like a widening gap between the bases and the donor class on both parties, I think, or the elites on both parties. But what's your reaction hearing me say all this?
I mean, I think there's a temptation to say, I always knew, the libs knew, man. We warned you the Nazis were going to take over. But I'm surprised at how prominent those guys have gotten so fast. I always knew they were there, and I always thought they were worth worrying about. But I am also surprised by the speed and strength of their rise. And I think that you can see on both sides of the political spectrum a similar process playing out, which is that the broad mass of people are trying to disengage from politics. In the late 2010s, everyone I talked to was talking about Trump, like little random events. Like, remember the Covington Catholic kids, some random school where they like looked like they were making fun of some guy in a video, but they weren't really. And it was like this whole like multi-day flame war. Like, people would talk about that in their daily lives, just regular techies hanging out in San Francisco, going to their Airbnb cafeteria or something. That would be the topic of conversation, or the latest argument over cultural appropriation or Me Too or whatever. There was mass unrest. There was popular unrest. And of course, when there were the Floyd protests, half the people we knew went out to protest.
Yeah.
Even if later they repudiated the protest, they still went out there on that day. And so it was really a mass participatory thing in the world. And I don't see that anymore. Regular people are talking about pop stars again, and they're talking about travel, and they're talking about, I don't know, books and culture and movies and K-pop demon hunters and things like that. And there's still this sense that bad things are happening in the political sphere, but most people are tuning it out. That sounds good, but also what it means is that you get this so-called evaporative cooling effect, where everyone who's still engaged is a fucking lunatic. Yeah. And I formally include you and me in that too, but we're exactly. Much less lunatic. We're like the least crazy engaged people. But you go on X or on political TikTok, and it's just psychopaths. It's a smaller thing. X is a smaller platform than it was. Young people are not on it, and young people are not, is engaged in politics. You look at any metric of engagement in politics, it's down. People just say they're tuning it out, and yet, but then at the same time, on X is just nonstop race war screaming. That's all it is, all day, every day is just race war screaming. And then TikTok, same thing. And then because it's a smaller, shrinking set of crazier and crazier people, and maybe that wouldn't be a problem. Maybe that would just evaporate into thin air, and that's how it works. And then you just evaporate and you're gone. And that's probably what happened in the 70s and 80s. Probably, you notice in 1968 or 1970 or whatever, you had regular people who just go out and bomb some building for fun, or mass protests. Every single person went to an anti-Vietnam War protest, right, of a certain age, everyone. And then and so then things died down, but then in the like the 70s and 80s, you had these crazies. You had people like these extreme violent groups like the Symbionese Liberation Army, right, terrorizing and bombing and stuff like that. But then they were crazier than anyone had been in 1968, but there were fewer and fewer of them. And so I think eventually the crazy just evaporated. And by the 90s, we were growing up like laughing about anarchists, and reading the anarchist cookbook about how to make, like little contact explosives at home. I remember that. People were passing it around at school before 9/11. But anyway, but yeah, so it became this weird bad dream. And so, of course, this is what The Big Lebowski is about, right? Do you like that movie?
Yeah, it's a great movie. Classic.
It's classic. But you see, it's about LA in the 90s, and you see these reservoirs, these tiny little remnants of the unrest of the 60s and 70s. You see, like, this one guy, like Walter's mad about Vietnam, and like, the Big Lebowski's a hippie who remembers protesting and stuff. There's like this weird feminist woman who gets all this money from a rich family making like feminist art. Like there's all these little remnants of that era, but they're cartoony and goofy. And it shows, on the news, there's like the 1991 Gulf War against Saddam Hussein. And then like, it just shows how nobody cares. There's like, this aggression shall not stand, man. He's quoting George H.W. Bush. It's like the world calmed down. Nobody cares. And then, this old conservative guy is yelling like, the bums lost. Your revolution failed, Lebowski. The bums lost. And then like, but like also his counter revolution also lost. Like everyone, it's about how America calmed down. And I think this is happening to America, except here's the problem. The activists are still crazy. It's the people online who are still crazy. The engaged people who are spending all day shouting about politics and race war and, like whatever. The Blaze, this conservative publication, just hired this guy who is just insane about like anti-Indian stuff. He says DEI, deport every Indian, and then talks about beating up Indians, and he's just like he wouldn't try it in real life,
right?
But he screams it online, and so in our earlier era of politics, things calmed down, and like the crazies were like offline bombing some random thing. Here, the crazies are all online, where we still see them, and guess who else sees them? The staffer class, all these like 20-somethings who run both the Dems and the GOP, like the Dem 20-something staffers, they're just mainlining Palestine decolonial stuff all day long. That's all it is decolonization, Palestine, and then the Republican staffers all day long, they're mainlining Groyper, Hitler was actually a good guy kind of stuff, and they're just. These are the people, because we live in a gerontocracy, right? The old people run the parties. Old people are in the Senate, old people in the House, old people in the presidency. All the people officially in charge are old as hell. And old people who have to spend all their time campaigning and pressing the flesh and fundraising, fundraising all the time. That's what our politicians do. Professional fundraisers. Who's running the country? 20-something staffers are running the country. And all those people do all day is read the extremist content. They read X. Like X is a shrinking, dying platform, I think, culturally. But in terms of the culture of the political staffer class, like they're deep in it. Like X is still God to them. The people running this country are imbibing the nuts. It's as if the people running the country in the like 80s and 90s had been hanging out with like the Weather Underground. In fact, Obama did hang out with an old member of the Weather Underground.
Yes.
But then, like, Obama was not radicalized by the Weather Underground.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. If you're a small business owner, you know how messy finances can get. A bank account here, an invoicing app there, tax spreadsheet somewhere else. And before you know it, you're juggling half a dozen tools and still feeling behind. That's exactly why there's Found. Found eliminates the clutter by giving you one platform that handles it all. Banking, bookkeeping, invoices, and taxes. No more paying for multiple subscriptions or trying to make outdated apps work together. Found reimagines what business banking should be by putting everything, expense tracking, tax estimates, invoicing, and contractor payments, right inside your business checking account. account. It's the kind of tool that makes you wonder how anyone managed their business finances without it. Found brings everything together so you can actually stay on top of things instead of constantly catching up. Take back control of your business today. Open a Found account for free at found.com. That's FOUND.com. Found is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services are provided by Lead Bank, member FDIC. Join the hundreds of thousands who've already streamlined their finances with Found.
Yeah.
And
well, I want to ask how we should interpret Mamdani, and what that means for New York.
well,
or just the left.
so Mamdani is not incredibly popular. Had the anti-Mamdani vote not been split, he might have actually lost. He is charismatic, and he tacked strongly to the center on many things, saying he's going to build housing, condemning anti-Semitism, repudiating some of his earlier statements, and blah blah blah. But at the same time, he repudiated defund the police. He said no. I was wrong about that. That was, I went crazy. Sorry guys, I was young, I was crazy. Anyway, so then I was saying what everyone else felt they had to say when there were protests rampaging through American cities. Okay, fine. Anyway, they gave him a pass. So he did all the things that a left-wing person has to do to get elected in a major city, in a big progressive blue major American city. Right? He did that. And then he did that. He executed that well. A lot of people have a lot of reservations about him. He can do one of two things. So does this mean America's getting crazier? No. It means that sometimes blue cities elect people like that. And it is emblematic of a certain kind of crazy. Like yes, the Islamo-leftism idea is kind of crazy and it's out there. And I'm sure those people think Zoran's their number one champion. And that Islamo-leftism is the future of the Democrats, future of everything. I'm sure they think that, but I don't think Zoran's election actually means that. Here's two things Zoran could do. Number one, Zoran could go, do tack to the center, respectability politics like AOC. Okay, he could moderate on stuff and repudiate his base and fight with his base and say, oh, I don't know, refuse to call the war in Gaza genocide, or I don't know. So he could do something like that. And then he could, say, actually, capitalism is good for building houses, blah, blah, blah. And then his base could get angry at him, the leftists in Brooklyn could get really angry at him. And yet he could gain wider popular support and maybe become a durable, tack to the center political figure with a national future. Or he could spend his whole time getting in performative fights with people who don't like the fact that he's an out and out leftist, whatever, socialist. He could spend all his time doing canceling meritocracy in New York schools, which he can do. And then getting, suddenly there goes the Asian vote. And then he can, expressing more sympathy with some murderer than with their victim. There's always going to be a murder in New York, some sensational murder, because it's a big enough city. And so he could say oh, actually, this guy was just throwing a temper tantrum. Chesa Boudin said this, right? About a murderer. Oh, he's just throwing a temper tantrum. Yeah. And so then that's what that quote was the end of Chesa Boudin's career.
Yeah.
And then he could do something like that. He could go in really hard on the free buses and the free grocery stores and these symbolic ass policies that are going to have a relatively little, small material impact. He could go hard on those things and he'll get bogged down because the mayor is not omnipotent in New York. There's a lot of checks and balances on the mayor's power. The mayor can't just snap his fingers and make everything change. And so then he'll get bogged down. He'll get bogged down in controversies. The New York Post will yell about what he says every day. And then in that sense, he'll, and then that will, that kind of be the end of him, I think, because he'll be bogged down in inertia, and then slowly people will start blaming him for all the standard problems that they blame whoever is in power for. High rents. It's Mamdani's fault, right? And so then you get this everywhere. Any mayor will eventually get this unless they deliver big on something. People will feel this restless dissatisfaction with the incumbent. So I think that he can either move up by becoming a centrist or start fights and sort of get frustrated. I think those are essentially the two ways that he could go.
Yeah. And Yeah, are you predicting that that New York a few years from now descends into a really tough spot, or is it, kind of a lot of sort of hullabaloo about not that much, and does the mayor even have that much you know power to begin with to kind of mess things up even if they wanted to?
I mean, I think the mayor in New York is not like the weakest mayor, but they're not the strong. They're very far from the strongest mayor. And I think that, you know, like the mayor can't just wave his hand and make public grocery stores appear. He'll need city budgets, right? City council will have to give him that money. Or then he can't. I don't think he can make buses free. I do not. Believe he cannot do that. He can push for it, and then it'll get watered down, and then it'll be a symbolic gesture, or they'll have a few free buses or something like that. It'll be a symbolic gesture. There'll be like crime on the bus. People will be like, oh, because Mamdani let people on for free, even if he didn't actually, even if it got bogged down. People are like, with all these free buses, and people are actually just jumping fares like they always do. Right. And so then, and then people are like, well, we need to bring back bus fares, which no one was paying anyway. So I'm saying that, like, being this ideological lightning rod as head of our top city is an inherently precarious, difficult position to be in.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, Zoran kind of illustrates the direction in which the when I say the left, I don't mean Democrats. I don't mean your normie lib, like person. When people on the right say the left, they include Democrats and woke people and everybody. But Zoran is the future of like leftists. So Zoran is the new Bernie, right? Bernie had no successor. AOC was not going to be a successor. Bernie will die. He's an old man, and Zoran will be the new guy. He'll be the new Bernie. But what has Bernie gotten done ever? Like Bernie sponsored like approximately zero major legislation. Like he's never gotten anything accomplished in his entire life. He never, he didn't come that close to being president in 2016, but that's the closest he'll ever come. And he did a lot of rhetoric, pointed people in the direction of certain issues like, I don't know, universal health care and student loans. And then really didn't do a lot. Like Bernie was much more important as a symbol and rhetorician. I don't even, probably a bad look for me not to know that word. Anyway,
rhetorician, right?
Yeah, I think so. Anyway, he was very important as an ideas guy, and I think Zoran will be that. And it's showing the passing of the torch of like leftist energy from sort of old Jewish socialists who really strongly identified with the idea of the working class in unions and were fairly friendly toward European socialism. That's Bernie. That's the old leftist stuff. Two, the new leftist stuff will be explicitly decolonial in nature. It will be attempting to like rectify colonialism and lots of like native land stuff and like anti-Israel stuff and like things like that. It'll be explicitly pro-Islamic, thinking of Islam as a resistance movement against European colonialism rather than its own kind of imperialism that dates back even longer than European colonialism, which, instead of thinking of it that way, they'll push toward thinking of Islam as like this oppressed minority kind of thing. Racism. So, there was a brief time in the 2010s when racism could mean any sort of racial thing, but traditionally racism in America, people talk about anti-Black racism.
Yeah.
Like that's what it's about. And I don't think that's going away, but I think that the failure of the average Black American to be on board with some of the more strongly progressive policies of the late 2010s and early 2020s was a big sort of black pill for a lot of people on the far left. Right? People said, "Oh, actually, Black people are very, very strongly in favor of police in general, like very pro-cop." Black people tend to be pretty patriotic on surveys, pretty against, like more conservative on trans stuff, gender stuff than white Americans on average, right? And so I think people realize that, and people have to be reminded of that, that like that American Black people are culturally relatively conservative, even though they vote strongly Democratic. And I think then when people realize that this sort of dream, like this faded sort of echoes of this 1960s dream of like white leftists and Black people uprising and overthrowing America arm in arm, which is never going to happen. But a lot of people entertain that idea. And if you read the book Days of Rage, they talk about this a lot and interview people about this. It was never going to happen. And then people had to be reminded again that that is not going to happen. But I think people, leftists, like people like socialist type leftists will continue to harbor this idea about Islam and Muslims. That Islam is the great force that will defeat the West, Europe, white people, whatever, colonialism, whatever they see, capitalism, I don't know, that Islam will defeat that. And in fact, this isn't the first time you thought that. Like, you actually had people like sort of some leftist types embracing Islam in the late 60s and 70s. In fact, you can even argue the Nation of Islam was part of that. This idea that, maybe we can't overthrow America and Europe and all this stuff, but maybe the Muslims can, because like in the old days, they beat them. There's like this other huge civilization. There's like 1 billion Muslims out there, and they'll defeat Europe and America and overthrow them, and her. And like you did see in the Iranian Revolution, the socialist leftist students who actually carried out the Iranian Revolution allied with a bunch of Islamists from the small towns. And that's how the Iranian regime came to be. Because the Islamists sort of they stabbed the socialists in the back, threw them all in prison, and then took over. Of course, the same thing would happen here if we ever had that, right? But the idea is like in the moment, you're looking for any enemy that you feel is powerful and strong and can like beat up your enemy. If you're failing to like win, you're like, what big ally could I get who could beat up my enemy for me? And I think that some leftists who's thinking about foreign policy and whatever is not always very clear or strong or reasonable entertain some idea like this in their mind. And it's it's silly, but it means that I believe that we will see some people on the left try to introduce anti-hate crime legislation where defaming the Quran, for example, will be counted as a hate crime, and that will go to Supreme Court. I predict this will happen.
Yep.
So I think that's the case. But again, you're not going to see it much in your daily life unless maybe you live in Dearborn. But like, you're not going to see this much in your daily life. Like, you're not going to be subject to Sharia law, like whatever. Like, it's not going to be a big deal for almost any Americans. And yet it will be a lightning rod for controversy. I mean, right now, anti-immigration people are sort of feeling their oats. They're feeling their power. They're like, yeah, we won the election. Now we can do anything we want. ICE is going to beat you up and kill you. And like, now they're like, get the Indians out. Get these people out. What, your ancestors came from Poland? You're out. Like, we get everyone out. And so then like, but that's not going to happen. And I think that if leftist energy sort of becomes very pro-Islamic, you might see anti-Islamic immigration stuff become like a big thing. Who knows? I don't know. Like, again, we're out of my expertise. Like, what do you think?
I think that it feels like sort of identitarian populism has legs on both sides. And I think, Mamdani on the left and the Groypers on the right, it seems to be that's where the energy is. TBD on how many candidates can channel that and win on that. And even Mamdani seems to be very clever at kind of straddling both, somewhere in the middle. And there actually doesn't seem to be a right-wing Mamdani who both can sort of appeal to that base while also, not necessarily governing on that. Although in Mamdani, we haven't seen anything yet from a governing perspective, of course. I think I resonate with what you said around I think it's really interesting, this idea that the common person is just kind of tired. And so the evaporative cooling effect just means that the extremists are getting more airplay and thus more, visibility among staffers. I think I hadn't heard that theory before, but that intuitively makes sense to me on both sides. And so then there's a question of, okay, but maybe the common person, the average person, just like maybe they're not checking, Twitter every day, but they will vote. And so maybe the sort of, extremeness on both sides isn't as strong as we think, or as strong as I think, because based on what I see on X and podcasts, et cetera, because I'm just in a kind of filtered, place on both sides.
Right.
Yeah, we'll, at the same time, Mamdani just won, and I think that shocked a lot of people. And so we'll see if this is a one-off or if there's something to it, either on the left or the right. Yeah, so I'm sort of too early to tell, but these are definitely things I'll be paying attention to.
Yeah. Anyway,
On,
well, all I can say is good luck to everyone on the right who wants to keep those assholes out of a dominant position in your coalition. I actually think it's possible. I think it is possible to stuff those guys, back in their hole. You can't get rid of them.
I think it is too. I agree, but I think the right is going to need real arguments, or I think it can't be just like, it's kind of like the same thing. You can't just be like, you're a racist, you're like, you're anti-Semitic. You have to actually engage, or like them on the issues of like why it's in their interest to have more high skilled immigrant. By the way, I really appreciate the podcast you did with Pascal. We're going to put it on Econ 102 on high skill, on both low skilled and high skilled immigration. And I feel like that's a good example of engaging the right on the things that they care about. I think there's a chance too, but I think on some issues the right has been willing to engage and have conversation, as has the left. But I think on others it hasn't really. And when you just try to just say, hey, you're bad, I feel like you lose some hearts and minds. And I think that's a surprising thing for me, just seeing the Tucker and the other stuff of just like how many. It's not just meme lords. It's also people who just earnestly believe what they're saying, and so I'm hopeful that they'll start to be engaged on like substantively. Anyways, I want to be mindful of time. We've covered some of the major topics of the last few weeks. Israel, Mamdani, sort of the Tucker, sort of the discourse and maybe civil war on the right. Maybe let's leave it at this for now, and until next time.
Until next time, sir.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Econ 102. If you liked this episode, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, leave us a rating or review, and share it with your friends and family. For more episodes, go to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and follow us on X at Erik Torenberg and at No Opinion. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.